In 1972, a man turned the peaceful Genesee River into a crime scene. The serene waters which once symbolized tranquility and natural beauty became a silent witness to unspeakable horrors. The river, winding through the heart of Rochester, New York, would never be the same again. His name was Arthur Shawcross, a seemingly ordinary man with a dark, hidden side. Shawcross had a troubled past marked by violence and instability. He had already served time for previous crimes, but no one could have predicted the extent of his future atrocities. He would become known as the Genesee River Killer. The media frenzy that followed his crimes brought fear and panic to the community. Headlines screamed of his brutal acts, and the public was gripped by a mix of terror and morbid curiosity. Shawcross terrorized Rochester, New York for years. The city, known for its vibrant culture and close-knit community, was overshadowed by the fear of an unseen predator. Residents lived in constant dread, unsure of when or where he would strike next. He preyed on the vulnerable, targeting those who were often overlooked by society. His victims included sex workers and homeless individuals, people who were already struggling to survive. Shawcross exploited their vulnerabilities, using their trust against them, leaving a trail of bodies in his wake. Each crime scene was a grim reminder of his presence, a chilling testament to his brutality. The police worked tirelessly to piece together the clues, but Shawcross remained elusive, always one step ahead. His crimes shocked the nation. The sheer savagery of his acts and the randomness of his targets left the public in a state of shock. News outlets across the country covered the story extensively, and the name Arthur Shawcross became synonymous with terror. His trial captivated the world. The courtroom was packed with journalists, spectators, and family members of the victims. The proceedings were broadcasted live, and people from all walks of life tuned in to witness the unfolding drama. The trial revealed the depths of Shawcross's depravity and the pain he had inflicted on so many. This is the story of a monster hidden in plain sight. Arthur Shawcross was a man who walked among us, blending into the fabric of society while harboring a darkness that few could fathom. His tale is a stark reminder of the evil that can lurk behind the most ordinary of facades. Arthur John Shawcross was born in Kittery, Maine in 1945. His childhood was troubled from the start. He faced abuse and neglect. Shawcross displayed disturbing behavior at a young age. He was prone to violence and cruelty to animals. Bedwetting and fire setting became common occurrences. These were early warning signs of a deeply disturbed psyche. A psyche that would later unleash unimaginable horrors. As Shawcross grew older, his problems intensified. He dropped out of school. He engaged in petty crime. His urges became darker. In 1968, he committed his first known murders. He killed 2 children in his hometown of Watertown, New York. Shawcross was caught and imprisoned. He served 12 years for manslaughter, but prison did not rehabilitate him. It only fueled his rage and twisted desires. Released in 1987, Shawcross drifted to Rochester. He had served 15 years in prison for the brutal murders of 2 children, but now he was a free man. The city of Rochester, with its bustling streets and serene riverbanks, seemed like the perfect place for him to start anew. Little did the residents know, a nightmare was about to unfold in their midst. He found work as a kitchen worker. It was a job that allowed him to blend in, to appear as just another ordinary person trying to make a living. He was diligent and hardworking, traits that made him well-liked by his colleagues. But behind the facade of normalcy, dark thoughts festered. He blended into society, appearing unremarkable. To his neighbors and co-workers, he was just another face in the crowd. He attended local events, shopped at the same stores, and walked the same streets as everyone else. His ability to mask his true nature was chillingly effective, but beneath the surface, the monster lurked. Shawcross harbored a deep-seated rage and a twisted desire for violence. His past crimes had not satiated his bloodlust, they had only fueled it. The darkness within him was waiting for the right moment to resurface. In 1988, he began killing again. The year marked the beginning of a new reign of terror. His first victim was a young woman, and the brutality of the crime shocked the community. But this was only the beginning. His victims were primarily women. They were often vulnerable, living on the fringes of society. Many were struggling with addiction or homelessness, making them easy targets for Shawcross's predatory instincts. He preyed on their desperation and trust. Many were sex workers living on the margins. He strangled them, he mutilated their bodies. The brutality of his actions was beyond comprehension. Each murder was a grotesque display of his inner demons, a testament to his complete lack of empathy and humanity. He dumped them in the Genesee River. The river, once a symbol of tranquility, became a graveyard. The discovery of each body sent waves of fear and sorrow through the community. The serene waters of the Genesee now held a dark secret. Terror gripped Rochester as the body count rose. The news of the killing spread like wildfire and the city was plunged into a state of panic. People were afraid to walk the streets alone, and the once bustling nightlife came to a standstill. The fear was palpable. Police launched a massive manhunt. Law enforcement agencies were under immense pressure to catch the killer. They scoured the city, set up roadblocks, and conducted countless interviews. The search was relentless, but Shawcross remained elusive, always one step ahead. The city lived in fear, wondering when the killer would strike again. Every shadow seemed menacing, every stranger a potential threat. The sense of security that once enveloped Rochester was shattered, replaced by an overwhelming sense of dread. The Genesee River killings had cast a long, dark shadow over the city. Shawcross's trial began in 1990. The case quickly drew national attention, with the media flocking to the courthouse to cover every detail. It became a media sensation. Reporters from all major networks were present, broadcasting live updates and interviews with anyone connected to the case. The public was captivated, eager to learn more about the man accused of such heinous crimes. The prosecution painted him as a cold-blooded monster. They detailed his gruesome acts, emphasizing the brutality and premeditation involved. The prosecutor's narrative was clear. Shawcross was a remorseless killer who needed to be held accountable for his actions. The defense argued he was insane. They claimed that Shawcross was not in control of his actions due to severe mental illness. Their strategy was to humanize him, portraying him as a victim of his own mind rather than a calculating murderer. They pointed to his troubled childhood, military service in Vietnam, and the horrors he witnessed there. Shawcross grew up in a rough neighborhood, experiencing neglect and abuse. His time in Vietnam only compounded his trauma, exposing him to unimaginable violence and death, and a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. This diagnosis was central to the defense's argument. They presented evidence that Shawcross suffered from severe PTSD, which they claimed impaired his ability to distinguish right from wrong. Experts testified about his brain damage and sexual sadism. Neurologists and psychologists took the stand, explaining how Shawcross's brain injuries and psychological disorders could have driven him to commit such acts. They argued that his mental state was a significant factor in his behavior. The courtroom became a battleground of psychological experts. Each side brought in their own specialist to support their narrative, leading to intense debates and conflicting testimonies. The jurors were left to sift through complex medical and psychological information. Each side presented conflicting narratives of Shawcross's mental state. The prosecution insisted he was fully aware of his actions, while the defense maintained he was a deeply disturbed individual who needed treatment, not punishment. The judge and jury faced the daunting task of determining the truth amidst the clashing expert opinions. The jury ultimately rejected the insanity plea. They found Shawcross guilty on 10 counts of murder. He was sentenced to 250 years to life in prison. The verdict brought some relief to a terrified community, but it also sparked debate about the role of mental illness in criminal behavior. Shawcross's case became a textbook example of the complexities of legal insanity. Life behind bars, Shawcross continued to fascinate and horrify the public from his prison cell. He granted interviews, boasted about his crimes, and seemed to relish the attention. His lack of remorse only solidified his image as a remorseless predator. He died in prison in 2009 at the age of 63. His death brought little closure to the families of his victims. Their pain and loss continued. The Genesee River Killer case left an indelible mark on Rochester. It shattered the city's sense of security and exposed the vulnerability of those living on the fringes. The case also highlighted the challenges of dealing with violent offenders with mental illness. In the aftermath, Rochester grappled with its identity as a community touched by tragedy. Arthur Shawcross remains one of America's most notorious serial killers. His crimes continue to fascinate and horrify. His case raises important questions about the nature of evil, the role of mental illness, and the failings of the justice system. And the Genesee River, once a symbol of tranquility, flows on, forever linked to the darkness that once haunted its banks.